Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have expressed to the chairman privately, I want to say publicly, how grateful I am for this hearing. I think this is something that is, to many of your comments, long overdue. I don't think most people realize that prior to 1979, there was no FEMA. And it was established by an executive order by Jimmy Carter. And so I think it would well serve us if we go back 40 years. I'd love to find the people that were in emergency management 40 and 50 years ago to get their experience about the ease of not having to adhere to the regulatory burden. Last year, 50% of our supplemental funding, and I say our, I need to rephrase that, the taxpayer-financed spending taken from the taxpayer, whether it's a direct tax or an indirect tax of inflation because of our deficit spending. Last year, 50% of our supplemental spending, all borrowed money, was FEMA directed. In 1980, it was 1% of the total supplemental funding that Congress allocated went to FEMA. And so for some of you that are experts, if you look at the chart of the growth of FEMA, it is unbelievable. It way passes inflation. We now have a FEMA that has become the Uber service for illegal immigrants in the last 2 and 3 years. It is way outside of its bounds. FEMA is involved with 30 different federal agencies now. And so we have major mission creep that has to be reined in. It has to be bitted, bridled, and somebody has to holler, whoa. And so I'm grateful that this conversation is happening. I'm going to give you a personal example because I want to tie it into my questions. I have a ag and dirt moving background. When I was serving on the state level, a friend of mine, Mark Allen, state senator, at the same time I was a state senator, after a 2012 tornado hit an area I represented, he was kind enough to say, hey, I'll bring my dozer down. You get on the dozer, I'll get on the skid steer, and we'll do some cleanup to help people that don't have the ability to finance it. So we did that. And so I'm moving this dozer. I'm in a very rural setting, Tushka, Oklahoma, and I'm moving material. I'm separating the vegetative from the non-vegetative to make sure we abide by the FEMA regulations. Many brush piles over. And I watched, because of federal regulations, because I was in the dirt works business. I was in the dozer, excavator, trucking business. What could have been something that in a country setting could have been solved like that is done every day today, where people in the country pull timber together, they light it on fire. We were not allowed to do that. We had to multiply the cost 4 times over. You had to bring in a half round, which is a bathtub on the back of a semi, and you had to take an excavator, track hoe, and you had to load that material that I had pushed up into a brush pile, dismantle it, load it in a half round, haul it off miles and miles, whether to be incinerated, major cost, or to be buried by another bulldozer. I can tell you, because I've turned in estimates to many customers when I served, when I was out of the government into the free market, you multiplied that cost at least by 4. It didn't make any sense. We've had stories come before this committee of not allowing snow to be moved, snow that melts, because of FEMA environmental regulations in tandem. So I'm setting you up, because I'd love to hear, Mr. Smitherman, from your experience, the waste that you've seen because of federal. Let me ask you a simple question. I love what you said. We piloted a state response. How freeing was that for you all to be able to make your own decisions and make a decision that you knew would save taxpayer money and immediately respond in Alabama?
Of course, I'm a fan of our performance during that. I think if you take a look at FEMA's evaluation of our performance, you'll see an alignment with that. We have had one small disaster where the cost of FEMA coming in and establishing the joint field office almost exceeded the cost of the disaster itself. So I think that would be my one example. No, that's not to say that, or an attack on FEMA being wasteful. It's the process they use. And I think if you look at a state-managed disaster, for those that we can handle, just help us handle it and let us go. So I think that's one example of efficiency. And sir, if I may, let me refine my answer on funding that the ranking member asked. Of course, if there's funding cuts, but really what I want to talk about is where you cut and where you put the resources. Because if you're talking about the first responders that are responding during the disaster, by no means am I talking cutting them. I'm talking reallocating funding that you save elsewhere to put at the capacity level so that you have those capabilities that are so needed across the states and the region and the United States. That's really what I meant with where to allocate the funding.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, since
I'm
you answered
sorry.
another member's question, if I could have a little leniency on my time.
Yes, sir.
Glad you were able to respond to him. Years ago, U.S. Senator in Oklahoma, Tom Coburn, asked for our state Director of Transportation to build a mile of road under federal regulations and use an apple-to-apple comparison and build a mile of, or what turned into be a mile and a half under state regulations. Apples to apples comparison. This was about 10, 15 years ago. He could build a mile of road at the same cost. He could build a mile and a half under state authority. And this was quality work. The dollars will go farther. You'll have more decision-making and control. And in a rate of inflation that deals with everything that FEMA is involved with, especially when you're talking about the large equipment that comes in and under disaster recovery, this is a solution that we have to make happen given where we're at financially as a country.